Well, good Tuesday morning. Thank you for tuning in to Inspiration for Today. We are looking this week at King Solomon and getting to know him. Yesterday, we talked about the many uniquenesses of him. Namely, the biggest, I guess, would be that he was the wisest man who ever lived and the richest man of his time, at least, if not more. Solomon, king who built the temple. Solomon, who wrote 3 books of the Bible. Solomon, who had great sin in his life. And we're going to look at that sin this morning. And although that sin may or may not be our temptation, it serves as a great warning to us that there are areas in our life where we could fall also. Let's start. This week we're reading as our verse for the day Proverbs, because Solomon is who wrote Proverbs. So in Proverbs chapter 5 at verse 18, Solomon wrote this proverb: "May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth." That's our verse, but I've got to read on. It's amazing that Solomon wrote this in light of what he did, but it might play into why he did what he did. Anyway, verse 19 says, "A loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breasts, your wife, satisfy you always. May you ever be captivated by her love." Why be captivated by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. Okay. Well, it revealed that Solomon knew what was right from the very beginning. In Genesis, a man will leave his parents and cleave to his wife. Marriage will be between a man and a woman. And that was God's plan from day one. Mankind has not always followed that, have they? We certainly don't do that today either. But I have to read God's opinion of polygamy, really. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 17 at verse 17. And Solomon, as well as all the Hebrews, were extremely familiar with the Old Testament, or the Pentateuch, because the first Pentateuch means the first 5 books of the Bible. He must, and here's 17:17 of Deuteronomy. "He, that is the king must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold." So Solomon knew that it was never God's plan that man would have more than one wife. And if that weren't enough, here's what it says by the way, God had warned Solomon that if you marry any outside the Hebrews, if you have more than one wife, don't do it. They will lead you astray. First Kings says, "King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter." He had married Pharaoh's daughter of Egypt. He had one wife. And then he went on to marry Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because you will surely turn your hearts to their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. And here's the key. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. and his wives led him astray. They did lead him astray. Sin always causes problems, and this was a real problem. Verse 4, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Verse 6, so Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. This was an area, evidently Solomon, this was a weak area. He knew it wasn't right. He knew it wasn't right. But he had 700 wives. Why? And he had 300 concubines. By the way, what's a concubine? They were not prostitutes. It was a woman who lives with a man as if she were his wife. It was like kind of a secondary wife. And the women would go along with that because in those days, the women they couldn't own property, they couldn't work. It was a tough role. So they would, in essence, hire on and be a wife, a secondary wife. And they might have been, it's clear from some verses that early on they were used to produce children. And that the king or whoever could have more children. Later it was just for sexual pleasure. But the fact is, no matter what, it was not right in God's eyes. It was not right in God's eyes. And what do we call that? Sin. Sin. Why would the wisest person in the world sin? You know why? Because Solomon was a sinner. All mankind, you and I, we're sinners. And so he was tempted, and I guess his area of most easily led astray, and believe me, Satan knows whatever your area might be. And he brought women to Solomon. And he fell for that. And he had these women. It was sin. Now, one of the theories is that the Proverbs were written later in his life, and he saw the results of sin. And so he writes a lot of those Proverbs from experience. That's one reason. You see, in the Proverbs, Solomon is very strong on how we should live our lives. It doesn't mean that he could or would be willing to do that. He knew the 1,000 wives were wrong, but he did it anyway. Others say that maybe it literally was a temptation for him like any other, and he just fell to it. But really, when we ask ourselves, why would Solomon do that? Maybe, we need to remember that we do things that we shouldn't also. And we're not the wisest. But I hope that Solomon knew it was wrong, repented of it, and at least in his heart gave his life, because those women led him astray, as I just read, to not honor the Lord our God. We need to confess sin and move on with life. Well, we're going to learn more from Solomon tomorrow. I sure hope you don't miss it. He's an interesting guy, isn't he? See you tomorrow.
And I won't worry about tomorrow. I'm trusting what you say.